Nestled between a bookstore and a flower shop on a quiet street, Claire's cough had always been a haven for anyone seeking comfort. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft hum of conversation, creating an atmosphere that felt like a warm embrace. Claire, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and a perpetually hopeful smile, took pride in making her cough a place where people could momentarily escape their worries. But over the past few weeks, something unusual had started happening. Customers began finding handwritten notes tucked discreetly under their coffee cups, in books from the cafe's lending shelf, or even on the bulletin board by the door. Each note carried a simple yet profound message: "You are stronger than you think. Today is a good day to start over. Kindness always finds its way back to you." At first, Claire assumed it was a quirky habit of one of her regulars. She even chuckled at the thought of someone sneaking around with a pen and paper while others sipped their lattes. But as days turned into weeks, the notes grew in number, and their impact became evident. One morning, a young man named Eric, who often sat alone by the window, approached the counter. He held up a note that read, "Every storm runs out of rain." His voice trembled as he said, "I don't know who wrote this, but it was exactly what I needed today." "Thank you." Claire smiled but didn't have an answer. It wasn't her handwriting, nor had she noticed anyone placing the notes. The mystery deepened when more customers shared similar stories of encouragement. An elderly woman claimed a note had convinced her to call her estranged daughter. A college student said one helped her calm her nerves before an important exam. The notes seemed to have a strange magic, touching lives in ways Claire never expected. One evening, after the cough closed, Claire sat by the window, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. She held a note she'd found earlier that day. "Second chances are everywhere, if you're brave enough to see them." The words lingered in her mind, pulling at something deep within her, a memory she wasn't ready to confront. As she turned off the lights and locked the door, Claire couldn't help but wonder, who was behind the notes? And how did they seem to know exactly what people needed to hear? The next morning, Claire arrived at the cough earlier than usual. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the coming of fall, and the faint scent of rain lingered. Unlocking the door, she stepped into the familiar warmth of her cough, but her thoughts were consumed by the notes. As the day began, she kept a discreet watch over the customers. Regulars filled their usual spots: Eric by the window with his laptop, Mrs. Harris, the elderly woman with her knitting, and the group of college students huddled in the corner over textbooks. Each person seemed oblivious to the mystery that had captivated Claire. Mid-morning, she spotted him, a young man who always sat near the back. He had dark, tousled hair and often carried a notebook. Claire had noticed him scribbling before but had never paid much attention. Today, her curiosity sharpened. Could he be the one leaving the notes? When he approached the counter for a refill, Claire decided to strike up a conversation. "Busy morning?" she asked, her tone casual. He glanced up, startled. "Oh, just jotting down some ideas," he said, tapping his notebook. "Are you a writer?" Claire pressed, keeping her voice light. He hesitated before nodding. "Sort of. I write short stories, mostly for myself. Claire smiled, handing him his coffee. That's wonderful. Stories have a way of touching people. He gave a polite smile in return and retreated to his corner. Claire watched him for a moment longer, but his focus remained on his notebook. If he was the one leaving the notes, he wasn't giving anything away. Later that afternoon, another note appeared. Claire found it tucked into a book someone had left on a table. This one read, "Courage grows in the moments you think you have none left." Determined to uncover the truth, Claire began piecing together what she knew. The notes appeared at random, yet always seemed timely. Whoever was behind them had a knack for understanding people or incredible luck. Her next suspect came to mind, Mrs. Harris. She'd been coming to the Café daily for months, always cheerful and observant. Could she be the one? That evening, as Mrs. Harris packed up her knitting, Claire approached her. "Mrs. Harris, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear," the older woman replied with a warm smile. Claire hesitated, then held up the note she'd found earlier. "Do you know who's been leaving these around the café?" Mrs. Harris studied the note, her brow furrowing. "Oh, how lovely. But no, I'm afraid I don't." She handed it back gently. "Why do you ask?" "They've been showing up for weeks now," Claire explained. "And they're making a difference. People keep sharing stories of how these little notes have brightened their days." Mrs. Harris's expression softened. "Sometimes, all it takes is a kind word at the right moment. Whoever's doing this has a beautiful soul." As Mrs. Harris left, Claire felt no closer to the answer. The mystery lingered, tantalizing and unresolved. That night, as she locked up the café, another thought struck her. Could the notes be for her, too? The café was quieter than usual the next morning, a soft drizzle keeping the usual rush at bay. Claire used the rare lull to reflect, her mind drifting to the note she'd found last night. "Courage grows in the moments you think you have none left." She couldn't deny how those words resonated. For weeks, Claire had been inspired by the impact the notes had on her customers, but now she began to feel they were speaking directly to her. A memory tugged at the edges of her mind, a time when courage was something she desperately needed. Years ago, before the café became her sanctuary, Claire had been a writer. Not the casual kind, but one with dreams of publishing her own novel. She would spend hours scribbling ideas in journals, the pages filled with characters and worlds only she could imagine. But life had a way of derailing even the best-laid plans. She thought back to that turning point, the day she received a rejection letter from a publisher she had pinned all her hopes on. It wasn't the first rejection, but it was the one that broke her. The words felt more personal, as if they were telling her not just that her story wasn't good enough, but that she wasn't. "I gave up too easily," Claire whispered to herself, staring at the frothy swirls of her cappuccino. A soft chime from the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Eric, the young man who'd shared how a note had helped him. He gave her a small wave and settled into his usual seat by the window. Eric's earlier words replayed in her mind. "It was exactly what I needed today." Claire found herself wondering how many other people in the café had stories like his, moments of doubt, heartbreak, or fear eased by the simple kindness of a stranger's words. That evening, as the cough closed, Claire found herself lingering once again. She picked up her favorite journal, a worn leather notebook that had been gathering dust on a shelf. Slowly, she flipped through the pages, revisiting the stories she had abandoned. The last entry caught her eye. Maybe I'm not meant to be a writer after all. The words stung. She had written them years ago, on the same day she decided to turn her focus to the cough. But now, the message on the note she'd found came back to her. Second chances are everywhere, if you're brave enough to see them. For the first time in years, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Determined to follow this newfound sense of possibility, she decided to investigate the notes with a fresh perspective. Maybe, she thought, uncovering their author would help her uncover something about herself as well. The following day, Claire arrived at the cough with renewed determination. She resolved to figure out who was behind the notes, and this time, she wouldn't let the mystery slip through her fingers. The day began like any other, with customers filing in, the smell of coffee filling the air, and soft jazz playing in the background. Claire greeted each person warmly, but her focus remained sharp. She watched as Eric scribbled away in his notebook, as Mrs. Harris knitted with her usual calm, and as other patrons came and went. Around midday, the cough became busy. A group of high school students crowded near the counter, chatting loudly, while two parents debated over the dessert menu for their kids. Amid the chaos, Claire spotted a man in a gray coat sitting alone at a corner table. He wasn't a regular, and something about him piqued her curiosity. As the lunch rush settled, Claire noticed the man had left. When she went to clear his table, she found a note tucked beneath the edge of his empty coffee cup. It read, "Sometimes, the things we're searching for are right in front of us." Claire's pulse quickened. She scanned the room, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. But he was gone. That evening, Claire replayed the moment in her mind. The man in the gray coat didn't seem familiar, but the timing was uncanny. Was it him? And if so, why leave the note behind so obviously? As she locked the cough for the night, she decided to check the security footage. The cameras were old, something she rarely used, but they might give her a clue. In the back office, Claire rewound the footage to midday. She spotted the man in the gray coat, sitting at the corner table. His face was obscured by the angle, but she noticed something else, the way he carefully slid the note under his cup before getting up. She rewound again, this time watching his arrival. He walked in with purpose, as if he knew exactly where he wanted to sit. Then something surprising happened. He pulled a notebook from his bag, leafed through the pages, and paused before tearing one out. Claire froze the footage. A notebook. Could he be the one behind all the notes? Her heart raced as she realized this might be her first real lead. The next morning, Claire arrived at the cough with a plan. She would keep an eye out for the man in the gray coat, and if he returned, she'd find a way to speak with him. The hours crept by, each tick of the clock heightening her anticipation. Customers came and went, but there was no sign of him. By late afternoon, Claire's hope had begun to waver, but just as she was about to give up, the doorbell chimed. There he was, the man in the gray coat. He stepped in with the same air of quiet confidence, scanning the cuff before taking the same seat as before. Claire's pulse quickened as she brewed his coffee herself. She walked to his table, setting the cup down with a smile. "Hi there. I noticed you left a note the other day," she said, her tone light but probing. The man looked up, his expression unreadable. "Did I?" Claire nodded, pulling the note from her pocket and setting it on the table. "This one. It was under your cup." His eyes flicked to the note, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then, a small smile played on his lips. "Ah, so you've been finding them?" Claire's breath caught. "So it is you." He leaned back, his smile deepening. "Guilty." "My name's Adam, Claire," she replied, shaking his outstretched hand. "Why have you been leaving these notes?" "They've had such an impact on people here." Adam hesitated, his gaze dropping to his coffee. "I used to come here years ago, back when this cough was my refuge. Life wasn't easy for me then, and I found inspiration in the smallest things. I started leaving notes as a way to give back, to remind other strangers, really, that there's always something to hold onto." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "I've watched these notes lift people up in ways I can't even describe. They've done so much good." Adam's smile softened. "That's all I ever hoped for. But you've been finding them too, haven't you?" Claire nodded. "I have. And they've reminded me of things I forgot about myself. Dreams I put away a long time ago." Adam studied her for a moment before pulling a small notebook from his bag. It was leather-bound and well-worn, much like the one Claire had tucked away at home. He slid it across the table. "This is for you," he said. "It's blank, but maybe it'll help you start again." Claire stared at the notebook, her emotions swirling. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Adam replied. "But sometimes, people just need a little nudge to find their way." That evening, Claire sat alone at her kitchen table, Adam's notebook in front of her. The blank pages seemed to shimmer with possibility, a quiet challenge to pick up where she had left off years ago. She ran her fingers over the leather cover, her thoughts drifting to her old journal. Without hesitation, she retrieved it from the dusty shelf where it had been forgotten. She placed the two side by side, her past and her potential future staring back at her. The memory of Adam's words lingered. "Sometimes, people just need a little nudge." With a deep breath, Claire opened the new notebook and began to write. The pen felt foreign in her hand at first, but as the words spilled onto the page, a familiar rhythm emerged. She wrote about the cough, the customers she'd come to know, and the mysterious notes that had inspired them all. Hours passed unnoticed, her focus entirely on the story forming before her. When she finally stopped, the once blank pages were filled with thoughts and ideas, a mosaic of emotions and memories. The next morning, Claire arrived at the cough with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As she served customers, her eyes sparkled with quiet excitement. She decided to thank Adam for reigniting her spark and ask him about the journey that led him to the notes. But Adam didn't come that day, nor the next. By the end of the week, Claire began to wonder if she would see him again. One evening, as she closed up for the night, she noticed something new on the counter, a folded piece of paper, tucked neatly under the salt shaker. Her heart raced as she opened it. The note read, "Every story begins with a single word." "Keep writing," Claire smiled, a warmth spreading through her. She didn't know if Adam would return, but she realized it didn't matter. He had given her exactly what she needed, a reminder that her story was hers to write. That night, Claire continued her work in the notebook, her passion reignited. She resolved to finish the story she had started, not for publishers or critics, but for herself. She could feel it now, the courage growing in the moments she once thought she had none left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.